Hey, Zach here in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. I'm finally getting here. There's going to be so much to see. I don't know how I'm going to pack it all into one video, and I know I'm going to miss stuff. But I'm going to try to focus on the railroad, and we are going to try to climb up onto the Maryland Heights Trail there. So come along with me. It's going to be a good one. The history of Harpers Ferry is far too rich and varied to cover in just one video. It is my intention to focus mostly on the canal and railroad history of the town, while giving some broad-stroke general background of the area to explain some of the other sites we'll see along the way. Harpers Ferry, West Virginia sits at the point where the Shenandoah River meets the Potomac. Here, where three states come together in the heart of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the rivers have remained steady even as the town around them has been transformed time and time again. Transformed by man, transformed by war, and transformed by nature itself. While much of the town these days is under the supervision of the U.S. National Park Service in honor of its long and storied history, Harpers Ferry couldn't have had a more humble beginning. That beginning came in 1733, long before the state of West Virginia, or even the United States of America for that matter, were created. At that time, a trader and trapper named Peter Stevens started squatting on land owned by Lord Fairfax, adjacent to the river confluence, and he set up a ferry service across the Potomac there. In 1947, Robert Harper came along and bought the squatters' rights from Stevens, while also purchasing 125 acres from Lord Fairfax to legitimize his claim to the land. Harper, a builder and a millwright, realized the immense potential of the two rivers, and in 1761 he started his own ferry service across the Potomac. 2 years later, in 1763, the Virginia General Assembly established the town of Shenandoah Falls at Mr. Harper's Ferry. Eventually, the name would evolve into simply Harpers Ferry. In the late 18th century, Harpers Ferry became a favorite retreat for Thomas Jefferson, who said it was perhaps one of the most stupendous scenes in nature, and that it was worth a voyage across the Atlantic. In 1794, President George Washington further cemented the town's place in history when he chose Harpers Ferry as the site of a federal armory and arsenal, making it the second of only two such facilities in the country at the time, the first being in Springfield, Massachusetts. Construction began on the United States Armory and Arsenal at Harpers Ferry in 1799, and between 1801 and 1861, it produced more than 600,000 muskets, rifles, and pistols. Industrialization expanded in the 1830s when the B&O Railroad and the C&O Canal both reached Harpers Ferry. In 1859, abolitionist John Brown led a group of men in a raid on the arsenal. They captured several buildings and intended to use recovered weapons to initiate a slave uprising in the South. The raid ultimately failed, and John Brown's men took refuge in the local engine house until a contingent of Marines led by Robert E. Lee stormed the building and captured the men. John Brown was tried for treason and hanged in the nearby Charlestown. The entire event was a catalyst for the American Civil War. During the Civil War, Harpers Ferry's precarious position along the north-south border led to numerous battles taking place there. Due to the topography of the surrounding mountains, Harpers Ferry was easy to seize and hard to hold. Indeed, the town changed hands no less than 8 times during the war. Much of the town was destroyed and the arsenal was burnt to the ground during the Civil War. In 1863, with the creation of the state of West Virginia, Harpers Ferry found itself once again in Union territory. After its complete destruction, the arsenal was never rebuilt, and ruins of it are still visible in the town. After the war, in 1867, the historically black Storer College was founded on nearby Camp Hill to educate formerly enslaved people, and it was the only college open to African Americans in West Virginia until 1891. The college operated until 1955, when it was closed due largely to lack of external funding. A major blow came to the town in 1936 in the form of a catastrophic flood that hit the Potomac River Valley. In Harpers Ferry, the water crested at record high levels, washing out 2 bridges and destroying many businesses in the lower town, essentially putting an end to manufacturing and commercial development in the area. On the bright side, this led to the establishment of the Harpers Ferry National Monument in 1944, a precursor to today's National Historical Park, which includes many buildings restored to their 19th century condition. So let's start our exploration of Harpers Ferry in the Lower Town Historic District. Starting in the parking lot for the train station, which we will check out a little bit later, we go just southeast to find this open field, labeled as the Armory Grounds. In actuality, the Armory buildings extended much farther up the river than the current bounds of this field. The current train station, seen in the distance through the trees, sits on ground also once occupied by the Armory, as seen on this map, with our position marked by the red asterisk. Comparing to this view from 1859, we would be just inside the main gates, looking toward the building on the right. Interestingly, the building on the left is the old engine house where John Brown took refuge during his 1859 raid. The building would later go on to become known as John Brown's Fort. If we turn around and just walk a few feet, we see the John Brown Monument, standing at the engine house's original location. The engine house sat here until 1891, when it was sold and transported to Chicago for the World's Fair. Eventually, it made its way back closer to home when local resident Alexander Murphy made space available for it on his farm. In 1909, on the 50th anniversary of John Brown's raid, the building was purchased by Storer College and moved to its campus on Camp Hill in Harpers Ferry. It sat there until 1968, when the National Park Service moved it back to Lower Town, fairly close to its original position. In fact, you can see it down the hill ahead. Let's go check it out. Here is the old engine house, with some old firefighting apparatus still inside. This is where John Brown and his men barricaded themselves during the final hours of their ill-fated raid. Ill-fated though it was, it did help to light the fire that became the American Civil War, that forever changed the course of the country. Moving west down Shenandoah Street, we see some restored buildings across the street that now house exhibits like the John Brown Museum. Behind John Brown's fort, on the left, is an area called Arsenal Square, which contains the ruined foundations of a couple munitions warehouses. We'll check out the other buildings on this street in a bit. For now, I'm going to go behind the ones on this side of the street and check out the railroad trestle back there. The fall colors have reached at least a couple of the trees around here. On this path, we can see the backs of the buildings on this side of Shenandoah Street. It looks like there's an old wagon stored in this one, at an exhibit called A Place in Time, exploring the growth of the town from past to present. On the left, we see the old wooden trestle of the Winchester and Potomac Railroad. The track was elevated like this to protect against the frequent floodwaters along the Shenandoah River, which is just off on the other side a bit. The Winchester and Potomac Railroad completed its route in 1836, running 32 miles from Winchester, Virginia to Harpers Ferry. The B&O reached Harpers Ferry right about the same time, and a connection was established between the two, marking the first ever intersection of two railroads in the United States. The W&P was eventually acquired by the B&O Railroad in 1902, and today this line exists as the Shenandoah subdivision of CSX. I've never actually seen a train on this trestle, but maybe that will change today. On the other side of the trestle, it is a short walk down to the shores of the Shenandoah River. We can hear busy Route 340 on the other side. I'm not quite sure what this little stone structure is. The river seems pretty calm today. Down near the confluence with the Potomac, we can see some old bridge pillars in the water. We'll explore those a little later. Back to the trestle again, and here we can get an idea of just how long this structure actually is. We'll stick to the south side of it for a bit to walk on the remnants of the old Hamilton Street, which is lined with the foundations of old residential buildings. These were the homes of the people that worked at the armory. We'll head back to the other side of the trestle now. Here is a bus stop. Parking is very limited in the town, but there is a shuttle service from parking lots located farther out. Across from the shuttle stop is this ruined foundation. Early town plans showed a Presbyterian church at this location. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a single old photo of it. A little farther down Shenandoah Street, we see another residential house. It's in pretty good condition compared to the foundations we saw earlier, but it does look like something is missing that used to be attached to the side. Looking at old town plans, this side of the road was once lined with similar residential buildings. Just beyond the house, on my side of the street, we find the remnants of the Shenandoah Canal, which was a 580-foot waterway between the mainland and Virginius Island, which was a highly industrialized area. This old bridge connects the island to the mainland. From the bridge, we get a good look at the canal, now filled with slimy green water that these geese don't seem to mind too much. I could probably fill a whole video just talking about Virginius Island, but that will have to be some other time. For now, we're going to head back to Harpers Ferry. As we head back down Shenandoah Street, we can see the imposing St. Peter's Church looming over the buildings. A lot of the restored buildings on this section of the street contain shops and exhibits set up by the National Parks Service. This is an industry exhibit set up in one of them. We can see how close these structures are to the hillside behind. On the other side of the street, we can see the front of those buildings that I walked behind before. Including this, the Master Armorer's house. I'm now turning up High Street, which in this area is lined with more restored exhibit buildings. Farther up, there are many shops and restaurants catering to the multitudes of tourists that visit on a yearly basis. Across the street, this little oddity caught my eye. Can anyone tell me what this is? I did climb up the hill to get a better look at St. Peter's Church, which was originally built in 1833 and then heavily modified in 1896, converting it to the stone-clad Victorian Gothic structure we see today. And just turning around, we see the oldest building in town, the Harper House. This house began construction in 1775 by Robert Harper, the town's namesake. Finished in 1782, Harper actually passed away before he could ever even live in it. Back down in the vicinity of John Brown's fort, we see this old culvert that runs under the railroad property above. I'm not sure what its purpose was, but it does look big enough for a vehicle to pass through. Here we're heading under the bridge carrying the old Winchester and Potomac tracks to reach the point. There is a lot to see here at the river's confluence. Standing in West Virginia, we can see the state of Virginia across the Shenandoah River, and we can see the state of Maryland across the Potomac River. Here is a better look at those bridge pillars across the Shenandoah. These pillars carried a road bridge across the river, built in the 1890s and surviving until it was destroyed by the flood of 1936. The pillar remnants seen crossing the Potomac were first constructed in the 1830s by the B&O Railroad. Several different bridges used these pillars over the years, which we'll explore more in depth soon, but the final bridge to cross here was also destroyed in the 1936 flood. Here we can see an aerial view during that flood, with the waters just getting up to the undersides of the bridges. And in this next one, the two rightmost bridges have already been washed away. Note the string of rail cars on the other bridges, intended to weigh them down against the force of the rushing water. Finally, here is a view after the flood waters abated, with only the pillars remaining, except for that one truss section on the road bridge. These pillars that are still standing are a testament to the destructive power of the water. I'm now going to start my hike up to the Maryland Heights Cliffs before it gets too crowded. We'll have to use the footpath on one of the existing railroad trestles to get to the Maryland side. This bridge carries the Shenandoah subdivision of CSX across the Potomac, and there used to actually be a Y here. We can see that the Y actually used to start on the bridge, but the tracks have been removed. This path across the bridge actually carries the Appalachian Trail across the river. We can get a good view of the old bridge pillars as we walk across this bridge. There are also remnants of the old telegraph poles still attached to the structure. Here is another view of the spot on the bridge where the tracks once split. The other bridge that we can see just upriver carries the current CSX Cumberland subdivision across the Potomac. From the midpoint, we can see ahead to where both bridges end, just at the tunnel portal. And at the end, we get our first good view of the tunnel portal itself. The date of 1931 is a little misleading. The tunnel was actually bored in 1893, but was expanded to accommodate the newer bridge in 1931. Now, I am not generally afraid of heights, but these open grate stairs really freak me out, enough to go very slowly and carefully down them. We can see here the last pillar and the abutment to the original 1830s bridge that crossed the C&O Canal at this point. We get a good view up the cliffs of Maryland Heights above the railroad tunnel. And here is the C&O Canal bed following the Potomac around the bend here. Back down on the ground, this is one of my favorite views. The two railroad bridges coming together at the tunnel portal, with the cliffs above and the C&O Canal underneath. You can get a sense of just how important and eventually crowded this little corner of land was. There's a lot of history in this one spot, so let's take a look back before pressing on. The C&O Canal reached Harpers Ferry in 1834, sticking to the Maryland side along the Potomac. 2 years later, when the B&O reached the area, it had to build around the canal in this narrow strip of land between the cliffs and the river. It chose to cross the river, building a wooden bridge that was shared with wagon traffic. This alignment featured sharp curves on both sides of the bridge. On the Harpers Ferry side, a Y was constructed at the junction with the Winchester and Potomac Railroad. This Y was partially on the bridge, as the B&O had to stick close to the river to skirt around the Armory site. Here is a view of this wooden bridge. You can see the complicated engineering needed to accommodate the Y on the Harpers Ferry side. Here is another view with the Armory in the foreground. You can see how the B&O tracks had to be built up on a trestle right alongside the Potomac. This wooden railroad bridge lasted until 1861, when it was burned down during the Civil War. The bridge was destroyed and rebuilt a number of times during the war, with the B&O ultimately replacing the wooden span with its signature Bowman design. Here is the Bowman truss version of the bridge, built on the pillars of the old bridge shortly after the war ended. We're looking from Maryland to Harpers Ferry, and there's a lot to see here, including the sharp curve that the railroad experienced on the Maryland side. We can also see the road sharing the bridge. We can also get a sense for the complicated Bowman structure accommodating the Y on the far side. In 1893, the B&O sought to remove curves on their line and eliminate the need to share the bridge with road traffic. So they bored a tunnel through South Mountain and constructed a new double-tracked truss bridge, which is actually the one that we just walked over. The B&O Railroad line was moved inland on the Harpers Ferry side, since it didn't have to avoid the Armory site anymore. The W&P tracks were realigned slightly too, to allow for a connection with the realigned B&O. Once again, the Y was partially on the bridge, the remnants of which we already saw earlier. The B&O built a station just between the tracks, designed by E. Francis Baldwin, who designed many other stations for the railroad. This station still exists, although not in the same place. We will check it out a little later. The Bowman Bridge was kept in place alongside this new bridge, now split in half and carrying just the road. In this view from 1896, we can see the newly built station in its original location and the converted Bowman Bridge on the left. Since this image was taken so soon after the 1893 realignment of the B&O, we can still see the old tracks on the side of the river. The Bowman Bridge survived until it was washed away in the 1936 flood. The road was eventually rerouted to the Virginia side, where the present-day Route 340 passes around Harpers Ferry. A final realignment of the railroad came in 1931, as the B&O sought to further eliminate curves on the line. They widened the tunnel and built a new steel deck bridge slightly upriver from the 1893 bridge. This came with another realigning of the track on the Harpers Ferry side and the moving of the Baldwin Station to its current location. There is a short section of the 1893 alignment still in place near the Armory grounds, and we will check it out later. The 1893 bridge was retained, now solely carrying the Shenandoah subdivision. The junction point has been moved into the tunnel on the Maryland side. And that brings us pretty much up to date. We have to continue along the C&O Canal towpath to reach the Maryland Heights trailhead. Immediately, we see the remnants of Canal Lock 33. The tunnel you see is actually part of the sluice, which allowed water to still flow through when the lock gates were closed. It's actually intact for quite a distance, but must be filled in somewhere on the other side, since we can't see through. The building above is often mistaken for the lock tender's house, but it was actually not related to the canal at all, having been built by James Eglin around 1840. Here we can see the lock when it was still in operation. Look at all the structures around it which no longer exist today. After the lock, I look back to get a view of the 1931 railroad bridge from upstream. These drainage pipes caught my eye. The way they seamlessly fit into the stonework makes me think that they could be original to the canal's construction. Of course, now that I'm far away from the bridge, a train comes. Well, at least I could see it crossing the bridge through the trees. It is an empty coal train headed back into West Virginia. Up ahead is the footbridge across the canal bed that leads to the Maryland Heights Trail just on the other side of the road. From the bridge, we can look down and up the canal bed, now just filled with grass instead of water. And now the climb begins. We quickly ascend well above the roadway. Eventually, the trail turns away from the road and river as we continue to climb in elevation. There's a little bit of color on the trail, but it is still mostly green. Here's a little stream far below. This trail is often accompanied by a steep drop on the side. There are a couple of branches in the trail with not much signage to go along with them. I think I actually took the steeper path. These relatively flat sections are a welcome change from the otherwise constant climb. Here are the remnants of a naval battery, constructed by the Union during the Civil War to defend Harpers Ferry from the Confederates. Back to the climb. Another split in the trail, but at least this one is well marked. Up and up. And now the steep drop is on the right. One of the steepest parts is just before the crest. Looking back, it looks like the trail just drops off of a cliff. Finally at the top, but now we have to go back down to get to the overlook. The descent involves quite a few switchbacks. As I'm getting closer to the overlook, I can hear a train coming. Worst timing ever. I try to race down the steep trail to record the train, but it is so rocky here that I have to walk slowly to be careful not to fall. When I finally get down to the overlook, the train has already passed, And there are quite a few people here considering the few that I saw on the trail. Even without the trains, the views from up here are quite spectacular. Arguably better than footage I could have gotten with my drone, which unfortunately is forbidden in the national park. We can see the entire town, as well as the two existing railroad bridges. Here we can more easily see where the 1893 alignment of the B&O split off from the W&P, and the original location of the train station between the tracks there. And we get a bird's eye view of the 1931 double-tracked bridge. I love the details we can see in the Potomac riverbed from up here. Here's the view looking up the Potomac River, and we can see the canal and the footbridge way down below. We're even above the soaring hawks up here. At least I think they're hawks. In the town, we can see all the historic buildings perched along the hillside, relatively safe from the floodwaters that ravaged the lower town in the past. And watching over it all is St. Peter's Church. As I was freezing in the windy conditions on the cliffside, my ears were perked for any approaching train horns. And eventually I did hear one, but it sounded like it was coming from the old W&P tracks. And sure enough, a couple of engines were slowly maneuvering down the wooden trestle. As they slowly approached the Potomac crossing, I heard another train coming. It turned out to be Amtrak's Capital Limited on its way to DC from Chicago. It actually stops at the station here in Harpers Ferry. I couldn't believe my luck, seeing two trains crossing the Potomac at the same time. The Amtrak train started up, but then there occurred a sort of Mexican standoff as they tried to decide who would go first. While they both sat there, I zoomed in on the engines sitting on the 1893 bridge and saw that the lead one seemed to be a Conrail Heritage unit. Eventually, the Amtrak decided to go first, continuing on its way toward DC. At this point, I had been up here for over an hour and was frozen solid. The engines didn't seem to be moving anytime soon, so I just decided to head back down. The path back down was much easier, And I was very happy to finally reach the warmer and less windy conditions at the bottom. Crossing back over the rail bridge, the sun was a little better positioned to see the river confluence and the old bridge pillars. We can also better see the rocky bottom of the river here. Back on the town side, here is the intact section of the B&O 1893 alignment that I was talking about before. I've read accounts that this section of track was still in use up into the 1970s for excursion train traffic and later for maintenance of way equipment storage. Nowadays, it is completely severed and abandoned since the switch on the bridge has been removed. If you have any stories of seeing trains on this track, let me know in the comments. As I was exploring this track, I heard another train horn, so I ran to the station to catch it. It was a CSX train heading west, carrying loaded deep well cars. Unfortunately, my battery chose this moment to run out. And by the time I got my replacement battery, the train had passed. But I still wanted to check out the area a little. Here we are looking across the 1931 bridge toward the tunnel. Those red lights do not bode well for seeing another eastbound train. From the train platform, I could look up to the cliffs above the tunnel and see exactly where I was perched earlier. There's still a lot of people up there. Let's check out the old train station, constructed in 1893, but sitting at this location since 1931. This station appears to have a lookout tower built right onto it, but the walkway up to the door seems to be missing. Some of the roof is braced up here by 2x4s, hopefully implying that repairs to the station are underway. There's a passenger shelter across the tracks, and an underground passageway in place to reach it. A similar underground passage was supposedly in place at the station's original location. From the other side, we can get a nice unobstructed view of the station along the tracks. Back on the station side, here are the stairs leading up to the tower, and here we see the passenger waiting platform. Unfortunately, the station itself was locked. Before heading out, I took one last look around at the town from ground level, checking out some of the beautiful architecture of the buildings on High Street. As tired as I was after this long day, I wanted to see if I could get a shot of the other end of the tunnel. Along the way, I was able to catch this image of the Route 340 bridge, just downriver from Harpers Ferry. I drove along Sandy Hook Road, which also happens to be the old right-of-way of the train tracks, and I was able to catch this view of the East Portal to close out my day. Well, I hope you liked this visit to Harpers Ferry. I know I didn't see everything, and I didn't get the greatest luck with trains. I missed quite a few when I was on the trail, but maybe I'll make a whole day of coming back here one day and just see how many trains I can see. Anyway, if you like this video, let me know what your favorite part was. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and I'll see you next time.